Margaret wiped her hands on her apron for what felt like the 1000th time that morning. It was a nervous habit she developed over the years, one that kicked in whenever she felt the weight of the world pressing down on her shoulders. And lately, that weight had been heavier than usual. 25 years. A quarter of a century. That's how long she'd been working for the Morrison family in their sprawling colonial home in Westchester County, just north of New York City. She'd started when she was 32, fresh from a messy divorce and desperate for stability. Now, at 57, the lines around her eyes told stories of sleepless nights, early mornings, and a loyalty that had never once been questioned. Until today. The Morrison house sat at the end of a tree-lined street where every lawn was manicured to perfection and every driveway housed at least 2 luxury cars. It was the kind of neighborhood where people smiled and waved but never really saw each other. Margaret had learned early on that she was even more invisible than most, just part of the household machinery, like the sub-zero refrigerator or the heated floors. She'd arrived at the Morrison home on a crisp October morning in 1999. The leaves had been turning brilliant shades of amber and crimson, and the air smelled of wood smoke and possibility. Victoria Morrison, Mrs. Morrison back then, though Margaret had been instructed to call her Victoria after the first year, had hired her to help with the children. There were 3, Emily, who was 8 at the time, Daniel, who was 5, and baby Grace, barely 6 months old and colicky as hell. "I need someone reliable," Victoria had said during the interview, her perfectly manicured nails tapping against the marble kitchen counter. "Someone who understands that this isn't just a job, it's a commitment to our family." Margaret had nodded eagerly, desperate for the position. The pay was generous, the benefits were good, and most importantly, it came with a small apartment above the garage. After sleeping on her sister's couch for 3 months, having her own space felt like winning the lottery. Those early years had been exhausting but fulfilling. Baby Grace cried through most nights, and Margaret would rock her for hours, pacing the nursery while singing old lullabies her own grandmother had taught her. She'd learned which floorboards creaked, which songs soothed best, and exactly how warm the bottle needed to be. Emily had been shy and bookish, always hiding behind her mother's legs when strangers visited. Margaret had spent countless afternoons reading to her, helping with homework, and listening to her childhood worries about fitting in at school. She'd been there for Emily's first period, her first heartbreak, her high school graduation. Daniel had been the wild one, all scraped knees and boundless energy. Margaret had patched up more injuries than she could count, had sat through dozens of parent-teacher conferences when Victoria was too busy, and had been the one to teach him how to tie his shoes, ride a bike, and later, how to parallel park. And Grace, sweet, sensitive Grace, had grown from that colicky baby into a thoughtful young woman with dreams of becoming a writer. Margaret had encouraged every story, saved every scribbled poem, and had been the first person Grace had come out to when she was 16. "I think I might like girls," Grace had whispered one evening while they folded laundry together. Margaret had simply smiled and said, "Then you like girls." "That's beautiful, honey." Grace had cried in her arms that night, not from sadness but from relief. But here's the thing about being part of a family without actually being family, you're always one mistake away from being an outsider again. Margaret knew this intellectually, but her heart had never quite accepted it. She'd convinced herself over the years that the Morrisons valued her, needed her, maybe even loved her in their own way. She'd been wrong. The trouble started on a Monday morning in late October, exactly 25 years after Margaret had first walked through the Morrisons' front door. The irony of the timing wasn't lost on her later, though in the moment, she'd been too shocked to notice. Margaret had woken at 5:30 a.m. as usual, made her coffee in the small kitchenette of her garage apartment, and headed to the main house by 6 o'clock. Victoria liked her breakfast at 6:30 sharp, Greek yogurt with granola, fresh berries, and a cappuccino made with oat milk. It was Margaret's job to have everything ready. She'd let herself in through the kitchen door, punching in the security code she'd memorized years ago. The house was quiet, which was normal for this hour. Victoria would be upstairs doing her morning yoga. Mr. Morrison, Richard, had been in Singapore for the past 2 weeks on business. Emily was married now, living in Boston. Daniel had his own apartment in Manhattan, though he still showed up regularly for free meals and to do his laundry. Only Grace still lived at home, having moved back after college while she worked on her novel. Margaret had just started brewing the coffee when she heard raised voices from upstairs. Victoria's voice, sharp and distressed, cut through the morning quiet. "It's not here. I know I left it right here on the dresser." Margaret's stomach tightened. Victoria losing things was nothing new. The woman was constantly misplacing her phone, her keys, her glasses. But there was something different in her tone this morning. Something accusatory. Heavy footsteps on the stairs. Victoria appeared in the kitchen doorway, her face flushed, her hair still up in a messy bun from sleeping. She wasn't wearing makeup, which was rare if Victoria usually wouldn't be caught dead without at least mascara and lip gloss. "Margaret," she said, her voice tight. "Have you been in my bedroom this morning?" "Just to vacuum yesterday afternoon, like always," Margaret replied carefully. "Is something wrong?" "My jewelry box. The one with my grandmother's pieces. Several items are missing." Margaret's heart sank. "Missing? Are you sure you didn't move them?" "Of course I'm sure." Victoria's voice rose. "The diamond tennis bracelet, my mother's pearls, the emerald earrings Richard gave me for our anniversary, they're all gone." "Maybe Mr. Morrison moved them before his trip?" "Richard hasn't touched my jewelry in years. He wouldn't even know what's in there." Victoria pressed her perfectly manicured hands against the counter. "Margaret, I need you to be honest with me. Have you taken anything from my room?" The question landed like a slap. After 25 years, after everything Margaret had done for this family, Victoria was actually asking if she was a thief. "No," Margaret said quietly. "I would never." "Then who else could it be? You're the only one who goes into that room. You have the access code for the alarm. You clean, you organize, you touch everything in this house." Margaret felt her eyes burning but refused to let tears fall. "I've been here for 25 years, Victoria. 25 years without a single issue. Why would I start stealing from you now?" "I don't know. Maybe you need money?" "Maybe. I don't know, Margaret, but those pieces are worth over $50,000, and they didn't just disappear." The number made Margaret's head spin. $50,000. She'd barely made that in 2 years of work. "I think," Victoria said slowly, her lawyer's mind clearly working through options, "I need to call the police." "What?" "I have to report this. The insurance company will require it, and besides, if someone broke in." "You just accused me of stealing," Margaret interrupted, her voice shaking. "And now you want to call the police?" "I'm not accusing you specifically. I have to explore all possibilities." But they both knew that wasn't true. Victoria had already decided Margaret was guilty. It was written all over her face, that subtle mixture of suspicion and disappointment that comes when someone you've never really seen suddenly becomes uncomfortably visible. The police arrived at 9:47 a.m. Margaret knew the exact time because she kept staring at the kitchen clock, watching the minutes tick by as her entire world unraveled. There were two officers, Detective Sarah Chun, a woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor, and her partner, Officer Mike Rodriguez, who looked fresh out of the academy and clearly uncomfortable with the domestic tension filling the Morrison home. Victoria had changed into a designer pantsuit by then, her armor firmly in place. She'd also applied a full face of makeup, which Margaret found oddly telling. Even in crisis, Victoria needed to look perfect. "Mrs. Morrison, I understand you're reporting a theft?" Detective Chun pulled out a notepad. "Yes. Several pieces of jewelry are missing from my bedroom. Very valuable pieces." Victoria's voice was steady now, playing the role of composed victim. "I discovered them missing this morning." "When did you last see the items?" "Friday evening. I wore the diamond bracelet to a charity gala. I distinctly remember placing it back in my jewelry box when we got home." "And who has access to your bedroom?" Victoria hesitated, her eyes flicking toward Margaret. "My husband, myself, and Margaret, our housekeeper." Housekeeper. The word stung. After 25 years, after raising Victoria's children, after being there for every crisis and celebration, Margaret had been reduced to a single word that erased all history between them. "I see," Detective Chen said neutrally. "And your husband?" "In Singapore on business. Has been for 2 weeks. Is there any possibility he took the items with him? Perhaps for safekeeping or to have them appraised?" "Richard?" Victoria almost laughed. "No. He wouldn't even know how to open the jewelry box. He's not domestic." Detective Chen turned to Margaret, who'd been standing silently by the sink. "And you are?" "Margaret Fletcher. I've worked for the Morrison family for 25 years. 25 years, the detective repeated, her eyebrows rising slightly. That's quite a long time. Have you had any financial difficulties recently, Miss Fletcher? The question felt like acid. No more than usual. I live modestly. Have you been in Mrs. Morrison's bedroom in the past few days? I clean every room in this house, including the bedrooms. I was in there yesterday afternoon, but I didn't touch the jewelry box. I never touch personal items unless specifically asked to. Do you have access to the home's security system? Yes. I need it to come and go. Victoria interjected, Margaret is here before any of us wake up and often stays late. She essentially has free run of the house. The implication was clear. Margaret had motive, she wasn't wealthy, means, she had access, and opportunity, she was always here. I'd like to search the premises with your permission, Detective Chin said. We'll start with the common areas and then, if necessary, your living space, Miss Fletcher. Margaret felt her throat tighten. My apartment is above the garage. I understand. Do we have your consent to search? What choice did she have? Saying no would only make her look guilty. Yes. The next hour was surreal. Margaret stood in the kitchen, watching as officers moved through the house she cared for longer than most marriages last. They were professional and courteous, but each open drawer, each lifted cushion felt like a violation. Grace had come downstairs during the search, her hair wet from a shower, confusion written across her face. What's going on? Margaret? Mom? Some of my jewelry is missing, Victoria said curtly. The police are investigating. Grace looked between her mother and Margaret, and something in her expression shifted, a recognition of what was happening, of who was being blamed. Mom, you can't possibly think. Grace, not now. But Margaret would never. I said not now. Victoria's composure cracked for just a moment, revealing the fear underneath. Because that was what this really was, Margaret realized. Victoria was scared. Scared that someone had violated her home, her sanctuary. And it was easier to blame the person who'd always been there, invisible and controllable, than to face the possibility that her security was an illusion. Officer Rodriguez appeared in the doorway. Detective? You should see this. Margaret's heart stopped. They'd found something. But what? She hadn't taken anything. Everyone followed the officer upstairs, down the hallway Margaret had walked thousands of times, past family photos that documented years she'd been present for but never appeared in. They stopped outside Daniel's old bedroom. Daniel was Victoria and Richard's middle child, and he'd always been complicated. Charming but irresponsible. Charismatic but manipulative. He'd dropped out of 2 colleges, burned through 3 jobs in the past 2 years, and had recently asked his parents for money to cover gambling debts, a request Victoria had refused, one of the few times Margaret had ever seen her put her foot down with her son. Daniel still used his old room when he stayed over, which was happening more frequently as his financial situation deteriorated. Victoria had given him a key, though she'd forbidden him from taking anything from the house. Detective Chin stood in the doorway, her latex-gloved hand pointing to the closet. The jewelry box was hidden behind some shoe boxes. We found it based on the description Mrs. Morrison provided. Victoria pushed past everyone to look. There it was, her jewelry box, the expensive leather one Richard had bought her from Tiffany's. She opened it with shaking hands. It's all here, she whispered. Everything. Detective Chen's expression remained neutral. Mrs. Morrison, you said only you, your husband, and Ms. Fletcher have access to your bedroom. But your son also has a key to the house, correct? Well, yes, but... And he stays in this room when he visits? Yes, but Daniel wouldn't have. Victoria stopped, her face going pale. Oh God. Margaret watched as understanding crashed over Victoria like a wave. The late-night phone calls from creditors. The times Daniel had left family dinners early, agitated and distracted. The way he'd started avoiding his mother's eyes when she asked about his job search. When was the last time your son was here? Detective Chin asked. Thursday night. He said he needed to get away from the city for a night. Clear his head. Victoria's voice was barely above a whisper now. And did he have access to your bedroom? The door is never locked. I never thought. Victoria trailed off. The detective made a few notes. We'll need to speak with your son. Do you have contact information? Victoria nodded numbly, pulling out her phone with trembling hands. Throughout this exchange, Margaret stood perfectly still, her arms wrapped around herself. She felt simultaneously vindicated and heartbroken. Vindicated because the truth was coming out, she wasn't a thief. Heartbroken because for a few hours, Victoria had genuinely believed she was. 25 years of trust, destroyed in a morning. Grace moved to stand beside Margaret, reaching out to take her hand. Margaret held on tight, grateful for this one gesture of solidarity. Detective Chen turned to Margaret. Ms. Fletcher, I apologize for the intrusion. It appears this was a family matter. You're free to go about your day. An apology from the detective, but not from Victoria. Victoria was staring at the jewelry box in her hands, her face ashen. Whether she was relieved to have her valuables back or horrified that her own son had stolen them, Margaret couldn't tell. Probably both. "I'll need to call Richard," Victoria murmured to no one in particular. "He should come home. We need to deal with this as a family." A family. Margaret had once thought she was part of that family. Not anymore. The police left after taking photos and statements, promising to follow up with Daniel. Victoria remained upstairs, locked in her bedroom, making phone calls. Margaret could hear her voice through the door, sometimes angry, sometimes broken, always bewildered. Grace had followed Margaret back to the kitchen. "I'm so sorry," she said, tears in her eyes. "My mom was wrong to accuse you." "She knows it too." "Does she?" Margaret asked quietly. She's scared and embarrassed. You know how she gets when she's vulnerable." She lashes out. "I've worked here for 25 years, Grace. 25 years. And the first time something goes wrong, she immediately thought it was me. What does that tell you about how she really sees me?" Grace didn't have an answer to that. Margaret moved through the rest of the day like a ghost. She prepared lunch that no one ate. She folded laundry that no one thanked her for. She wiped down counters that no one noticed were clean. Victoria emerged from her bedroom around 4 p.m. Her eyes were red, her makeup smudged. She'd been crying, something Margaret had only seen a handful of times in a quarter-century. "Margaret," Victoria said, standing awkwardly in the kitchen doorway. The police confirmed that Daniel pawned some other items last month. Apparently, he's been stealing from us for weeks. Small things we wouldn't notice. The jewelry was going to be his big score." Margaret said nothing. "I shouldn't have jumped to conclusions about you. That was unfair." Unfair seemed like an inadequate word for what had happened, but Margaret just nodded. "Why don't you take the rest of the day off?" Victoria said, already turning away. "Come back tomorrow. We'll discuss everything then." And just like that, it was over. No real apology. No acknowledgement of the wound that had been opened. Just an awkward dismissal and a vague promise to discuss everything. Margaret untied her apron slowly, folding it with the same care she applied to every task in this house. She placed it on the counter, picked up her purse, and walked out the kitchen door she'd entered thousands of times before. Margaret didn't go back the next day. Or the day after that. She sat in her small apartment above the garage, looking at the space she'd occupied for 25 years. It wasn't much, a studio with a kitchenette, a bathroom, and windows that overlooked the Morrisons' perfectly landscaped backyard. But it had been hers, her sanctuary at the end of long days. Now it felt like a cage. Her phone buzzed constantly. Texts from Victoria, "Are you coming in today? We need to talk about this. Margaret, please respond." But what was there to say? Victoria had shown Margaret exactly where she stood. When push came to shove, 25 years of loyalty meant nothing compared to the reflexive assumption that the help must be the thief. On the third day, Grace knocked on Margaret's door. She was carrying a bag from the local bakery and 2 cups of coffee. "Can I come in?" Grace asked softly. Margaret stepped aside. They sat at Margaret's small kitchen table, the one she'd found at a yard sale 15 years ago. Grace pushed one of the coffees toward her. "You're not coming back, are you?" Grace asked. Margaret took a sip of coffee before answering. "How can I? Every time your mother looks at me, she'll remember that she accused me of theft. And every time I look at her, I'll remember that after 25 years, she believed I could do it. She was wrong. She knows she was wrong. Does she? Because she never actually apologized, Grace. She said it was unfair. That's not the same as I'm sorry. That's not the same as I was wrong to doubt you. Grace's eyes filled with tears. She's proud. You know how she is. Apologizing, admitting she made a mistake, it's hard for her. It was easy for her to accuse me, though. They sat in silence for a moment. What about Daniel? Margaret finally asked. What happened with him? Grace sighed. Dad came home from Singapore early. They had a big confrontation. Turns out Daniel's been gambling online, got in deep with some loan sharks. He'd pawned a bunch of Dad's watches, Mom's jewelry, he was desperate. They're making him go to rehab, paying off his debts one last time. And he gets forgiveness. Just like that. He's their son, Grace said quietly. It's different. I know it is. That's the point. Margaret set down her coffee cup. I loved you kids, Grace. I loved you like you were my own. I was there for every milestone, every heartbreak, every triumph. But at the end of the day, I'm not family. I'm staff. And staff can be sacrificed to protect the real family. That's not fair, Grace protested. We love you too. Love isn't just a feeling, sweetie. It's action. It's trust. It's knowing someone so deeply that you'd never believe they could betray you. Margaret reached across the table to squeeze Grace's hand. Your mother didn't know me. Not really. After 25 years, she didn't know me at all. Grace wiped her tears. So what are you going to do? I'm going to leave. Move somewhere new. Start over. At 57? Margaret smiled, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. Better late than never, right? She gave her notice formally the next day, via email. 2 weeks, as was professional and appropriate. She didn't ask for a reference. She didn't want one. Victoria tried several times to talk to her during those final 2 weeks, but Margaret kept the conversations brief and professional. She trained her replacement, a young woman named Sophia who looked at the Morrison house with the same wide-eyed hope Margaret had felt 25 years ago. Margaret wanted to warn her, to tell her not to mistake proximity for belonging, but she held her tongue. Let Sophia learn her own lessons. On Margaret's last day, Victoria made one final attempt. She cornered Margaret in the kitchen, the same kitchen where this had all begun. I wish you'd stay, Victoria said. I know I handled things badly, but we need you. The kids need you. The kids are adults now, Victoria. They'll be fine. I'll increase your salary. 20%. Margaret actually laughed at that. You think this is about money? Then what is it about? It's about respect. It's about being seen. It's about 25 years meaning something. Margaret picked up the last of her personal items, a photo of her own mother, a coffee mug Grace had given her one Christmas. I gave this family everything I had. I missed holidays with my own family. I put off my own dreams. I made your lives run smoothly, and in return, I expected. I don't know. Not gratitude, exactly. But at least trust. I do trust you, Victoria insisted. You didn't when it mattered. Margaret walked out of the Morrison house for the last time on a Friday afternoon. The autumn leaves were falling again, just like they had been when she'd arrived. The circle was complete. Grace was waiting by her car, holding an envelope. This is from Emily, Daniel and me," she said. "Don't open it until you're settled wherever you're going." Margaret hugged her tightly. "You take care of yourself, okay? Keep writing. You're good at it." "I will." "And Margaret? For what it's worth, I'm writing about this. About you. About everything. Because someone should tell the truth about people like you, people who give everything and get so little back." Margaret kissed her forehead. "Make it a good story, then." She drove away without looking back. Grace Morrison's debut novel, The Weight of Invisible Things, hit the New York Times bestseller list in its second week. It was the story of a housekeeper named Martha who dedicates her life to a wealthy family, only to be betrayed when convenience demands it. The reviews praised its emotional honesty and unflinching look at class, loyalty, and the invisible labor that keeps American households running. Grace had changed the names and some details, but anyone who knew the Morrison family recognized the story's bones. Victoria called Grace after the book came out. "How could you?" she demanded. "You made us look like monsters." "I told the truth, Mom. That's all." "Your truth, maybe. But you've humiliated this family." "No," Grace said calmly. "You humiliated yourself 5 years ago. I just wrote about it." The Morrison house had been through 2 more housekeepers since Margaret left. Neither lasted more than a year. Victoria complained constantly about how hard it was to find good help these days, never quite making the connection that maybe the problem wasn't the help. Grace had tried to find Margaret after the book came out. She wanted to send her a copy, to let her know that her story mattered, that it had been heard. But Margaret had disappeared completely. No forwarding address, no social media presence, nothing. It was like she'd decided to become as invisible in the world as she'd been in the Morrison house. But then, 3 months after the book's release, Grace received a letter. The return address was from a small town in Oregon she'd never heard of. "Dear Grace, I read your book. It made me cry, but in a good way. In a healing way. Thank you for seeing me. Thank you for telling the truth. Thank you for understanding that what happened mattered, even if only to me. I'm doing well. I'm working at a community center here, teaching ESL classes to immigrants. Funny, I spent 25 years making other people's lives work, and now I'm helping people build their own lives. It feels different. Better. I'm not angry anymore. I was for a while, but carrying anger is exhausting, and I've been tired enough for one lifetime. Now I'm just free. I make less money, live in a smaller place, but I'm free. Your mother wasn't a monster. She was just human, flawed, scared, unable to see past her own comfort and assumptions. Most people are. That doesn't excuse what she did, but understanding it has helped me let it go. I hope you keep writing, Grace. The world needs people who tell true stories, especially the uncomfortable ones. Especially the stories about people like me, the ones who keep the world running while staying invisible. You were always my favorite, you know. Even though I loved all of you kids, you were the one who really saw me. Who asked about my day? Who remembered my birthday? Who noticed when I was tired or sad? Thank you for that. Thank you for being you. I'm proud of you. Love, Margaret. Grace read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down her face. Then she carefully folded it and placed it in her desk drawer, next to the manuscript of her next novel. That evening, she called her mother. They'd barely spoken since the book came out. "Mom, we need to talk," Grace said. "If you're calling to apologize." "I'm not. But I think you need to. Not to me. To Margaret. Grace, that was 5 years ago. Why are you still? Because it matters, Mom. Because she spent 25 years of her life taking care of us, and we threw her away the second it was convenient. Because you never actually apologized. Because she deserves better from us. There was a long silence. I don't know where she is, Victoria finally said. I do. I just got a letter from her. Another silence. Do you think she'd want to hear from me? I don't know. But I think you should try. Even if she doesn't respond, you should try. It took Victoria 3 weeks to write the letter. 3 weeks of staring at blank paper, of drafting and discarding dozens of attempts, of confronting her own pride and shame and guilt. When she finally mailed it, it was short. Just 2 paragraphs. But it said the words that should have been said 5 years ago. Dear Margaret. I'm sorry. I was wrong to accuse you, wrong to doubt you, wrong to treat you as anything less than the valued member of our family you'd always been. You deserved better from me. You deserved trust and respect and genuine apology, and I gave you none of those things. I can't take back what I did or said. I can only tell you that I was wrong, that I've regretted it every day since, and that I hope someday you might forgive me. Victoria. Margaret received the letter on a Tuesday. She read it while drinking her morning coffee on the small porch of her cottage, looking out at the pine trees that surrounded her new home. She thought about responding. She even started a letter several times. But in the end, she decided silence was answer enough. Victoria's apology was important. It meant something that she'd finally said the words, but Margaret didn't owe her forgiveness. She didn't owe her anything. Some wounds heal. Some just become part of who you are. The trick is learning which is which. Margaret folded Victoria's letter, placed it in a box with other mementos from her old life, and closed the lid. Then she got dressed, grabbed her bag, and headed to the community center. She had a class to teach. And for the first time in 25 years, she was walking towards something of her own choosing, not away from something that had finally stopped needing her. Years later, when Margaret was 67 and thinking about retirement, she received a wedding invitation. Grace Morrison was getting married to a woman named Jade, and she wanted Margaret to be there. You helped raise me, the handwritten note inside read. You were more present than half the people who'll be there. Please come. Margaret almost declined. Going back felt like opening old wounds. But something in Grace's words, "You helped raise me," made her reconsider. She went. The wedding was beautiful, held in a garden upstate. Margaret sat in the back, not wanting to intrude. But during the reception, Grace found her. You came, Grace said, her face lighting up. Of course I came. Grace hugged her tightly. There's someone who wants to talk to you. She led Margaret to a quiet corner of the garden, where Victoria sat alone, looking older and somehow smaller than Margaret remembered. Hello, Margaret, Victoria said softly. Victoria. They looked at each other for a long moment, these two women who'd shared 25 years of daily life but had never really known each other. Thank you for coming, Victoria said. And, thank you for everything you did for my children. For raising them when I was too busy or too blind or too self-absorbed to do it properly myself. Margaret nodded. They're good kids. You should be proud. I am. But not because of anything I did. Because of people like you. People who loved them when I forgot to. It wasn't quite forgiveness. It wasn't a restoration of what had been lost. But it was acknowledgement. It was truth. And sometimes, that's enough. I hope you've been happy, Victoria said. I hope you found what you were looking for. Margaret thought about her cottage in Oregon, her students at the community center, the quiet life she'd built on her own terms. I did, she said. It took me a while, but I did. They talked for a few more minutes, carefully, politely, like strangers who once knew each other. Then Margaret excused herself and found Grace again. Thank you for inviting me, she told Grace. But I think I'm going to head out. Already? I've got a long drive home. But I'm glad I came. I'm glad I got to see you happy. Grace hugged her one more time. Come visit sometime? Just to visit, not because of any drama or crisis? I'd like that. As Margaret drove away from the wedding, away from the Morrison family one final time, she didn't feel sad. She didn't feel angry. She just felt complete. 25 years of her life had gone into that family. For a long time, she'd thought of those years as wasted, a sacrifice that went unappreciated and ended in betrayal. But watching Grace get married, seeing the strong, compassionate woman she'd become, Margaret realized those years hadn't been wasted at all. They'd mattered. Not in the way she'd hoped or expected, but they'd mattered. Love isn't wasted, even when it's not returned. Care isn't wasted, even when it's not appreciated. The work of holding someone together, of keeping their world running, of showing up day after day, that's never wasted. It changes you. It shapes the people you touch. It ripples out in ways you'll never fully see. And that, Margaret thought as she drove toward home, was enough. That had always been enough.